Case 1, Leah and Jerome Moser, Lower Providence Township, Montgomery County, 1985. Palm Sunday should have been peaceful for Linda Moser and her daughters, Donna and Joanne. They attended the morning service like they always did. Donna, 14, helped her mother carry the church programs inside. Little Joanne, only 10, sat beside her father through most of the sermon. Even after the divorce, they tried to keep things steady for the girls. None of them knew that the morning was already heavier than usual for the man sitting quietly near the back. Leon Moser had once been a respected figure, a Vietnam-era Army officer, a former seminarian, a man who knew scripture and discipline. But the man standing in that parking lot was far from who he used to be. Months of depression, job loss, and violence behind closed doors had changed him. Linda had felt the danger long before anyone else. She had lived through the knife held at her throat, the nights he erupted without warning, and the endless fear that kept her awake long after the girls were asleep. She had tried to protect them. She filed for help. She found strength in her faith and in her family. She walked into that church each week, praying for peace. But Leon's anger followed her everywhere. Just after noon on March 31st, the family met outside the church for the usual custody exchange. Linda stood near the car. Donna held her purse. Joanne stayed close to her father, unsure why the tension between her parents felt sharper than normal. Leon raised the rifle before anyone could understand what he was doing. The sound rolled across the parking lot like a shockwave. Linda tried to run. Donna reached for her mother. Church members dropped their palms and reached for their phones. Some cried out. Some couldn't move at all. By the time the last shot echoed, 3 lives were gone. A mother and 2 daughters who had done everything they could to break free. Leon collapsed beside them, blood running from a wound he had tried to give himself. But he did not die that day. He survived. And the truth of what happened that morning spread through Lower Providence like a cold wind. When police arrived, they found the rifle he bought months earlier, spent casings scattered near the car, and an envelope addressed to Linda. Inside was a message blaming her for the choices he had made. Officers knew immediately that this was not a moment of sudden rage. This was planned, intentional, final. The church congregation stood together in grief. Families who had sung hymns with Linda only an hour earlier gathered in circles, crying and praying. Parents held their children closer. The pastor struggled to steady his voice as he spoke with investigators. A community known for kindness now found itself trying to understand how faith and fear could collide in the same place. Leon confessed soon after. In court, he asked for death over and over again, telling the judges he was ready to leave this life. He waived his appeals. He refused protection. And 9 years later, he received the punishment he demanded. But the people who loved Linda, Donna, and Joanne never saw that as closure. Justice can settle the legal part of a story, but it can't heal the empty seats at the dinner table or the memories locked away in boxes. What remains most powerful in this case is not the violence, but the love those 3 shared, and the way a community refused to forget them. Their pastor once said he wrestled for years with what happened that day. He wanted to understand how someone could fall so far, but in the end he found strength in remembering the warmth that the girls brought to every service, and the courage Linda showed every time she tried to protect them. Their story became part of a push for new domestic violence protections in Pennsylvania, ensuring that officers could step in sooner when someone was in danger. Their lives changed laws. Their memory protected others. And in that same church where the worst moment began, candles were lit in their honor for years, soft flames glowing in the quiet, carrying their names gently into the light. Case 2. George Emil Banks. Wilkes-Barre and Jenkins Township, 1982. The story of George Banks does not begin with one house or one moment. It begins with a man whose life drifted between hope and confusion for years, until the fear inside him grew louder than the world around him. In Wilkes-Barre, people knew him as someone who kept mostly to himself. He had served his country, worked steady jobs, and fathered children he often said he loved. But those closest to him also saw something else. A man slipping deeper into beliefs no one around him could understand. Banks lived in a small home on Monroe Street with several girlfriends and their young children. The neighbors noticed the noise, the arguments, the tired faces of the women who tried to hold things together. But no one expected what would happen in the early hours of September 25th, 1982. Not in a quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood. Not in the place where children woke to the smell of breakfast and cartoons on weekend mornings. What made this case so heavy for the people of Wilkes-Barre wasn't just the number of lives lost. It was the heartbreaking truth that the person responsible was a father to many of the children who died, a man meant to protect them. It began just after 2 a.m. Inside the Monroe Street home, some were asleep, some were awake, tending to babies who still needed bottle feedings in the night. Then a single gunshot broke the silence. Neighbors hesitated at first, unsure if it was real. The next sounds removed all doubt. Panic spread room to room. Doors were shut. Children cried. The women knew something terrible had begun, but there was nowhere to run. When police arrived at the first address, and the scene was quiet, but the horror inside the home was unmistakable. 8 people, 5 of them children, were gone. Officers stood in shock, trying to understand how a father could carry out something like this. Before they could make sense of it, another call came in from a trailer park several miles away. At the Heather Highlands community, more shots had been heard. Someone reported voices yelling, children screaming, a man in military-style clothing running between homes. When police entered the second location, they found 5 more victims, including another child. A survivor, a young boy, had run to a neighbor's home, blood on his clothing, begging for help. His words were scattered but clear enough to guide officers to the truth. The fear that tore through Luzerne County that night left families trembling with disbelief. Nearly half the victims were children younger than 10. Many were Banks' own sons and daughters. The mothers of these children, women who had once tried to build a home with him, were among those killed. The search for Banks spread fast. Officers feared he might strike again. They tracked him to a house in Jenkins Township where he had barricaded himself. For hours, trained negotiators spoke to him through windows and doors, trying to reach whatever part of him was still willing to listen. The words that came back were scattered, filled with beliefs and fears no one could follow. He spoke of danger that wasn't real, conspiracies that existed only in his mind. And he insisted he had done what he felt he needed to do. By morning, he surrendered. When investigators collected the evidence, the AR-15, the ammunition, the military vest, the picture became clearer. This was not an impulsive act. It was shaped by years of paranoia that no one had managed to reach or treat fully. Through interviews and reports, it became clear that his thinking had been fractured for a long time. Friends, family, doctors, co-workers, many had seen signs, but not enough to predict something like this. In court, the journey was long and painful. The mother's family spoke through tears. Relatives of victims gathered in rows, holding hands, sometimes unable to even look toward the defense table. Banks' own behavior in the courtroom revealed just how far removed he was from reality. He shouted. He refused to cooperate. He rejected attempts by his own lawyers to help him. Through it all, the families watched, waiting for the system to acknowledge the depth of their loss. He was convicted twice, once in 1983 and again in 1987 after appeals. Both times juries heard the same facts and reached the same conclusion. But the years that followed grew more complicated. Doctors examined him. Courts debated his mental state. Decades passed. Eventually, judges ruled that he no longer understood the punishment waiting for him. His death sentence was removed and replaced with life in prison. For the people of Wilkes-Barre, the legal outcome brought mixed emotions. Some felt relief. Others felt frustration that such a painful chapter continued for so many years. But no one forgot the children whose lives were taken or the women who tried to raise them in the middle of a world they didn't know had become dangerous. The funerals were held together, rows of small white caskets. Entire communities walked behind grieving family members. Churches opened their doors for weeks. Schools held services for the younger victims. And for years after, parents would tell their own children about the love those mothers had for their kids. They spoke of their laughter, their favorite toys, the little things that should have carried them into adulthood. Time softened some of the pain, but the story never disappeared. Even now, people in that area remember where they were when they heard about the shooting. Some still recall the sirens, the news crews, the quiet streets the next day. And every year, someone leaves flowers at the places where lives were taken. Years later, Banks died in prison at 83. His passing closed the last remaining chapter of the case. But the families still hold on to memories, each one trying to honor the children in their own way. Some find comfort in faith, some in community, some in silence. This case is not only about what happened that night, but about the years that followed and the resilience of families who carried their children's names forward with love. In the shadows of loss, they found ways to keep going. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, love remains the part of the story that lasts. Case 3, Wesley Brunson, Monroe Township, Cumberland County, 2020. On a quiet stretch of Williams Grove Road, the nights were usually calm. Neighbors often talked about how peaceful the area felt, a place where families settled into their routines and young parents learned how to balance work, stress, and the exhaustion that comes with raising small children. But on March 19, 2020, the calm of that home was broken in a way no one expected. The story begins with a mother stepping out for a short moment. Something simple, something every parent does. She trusted that her children were safe at home with their father. Holden, just 5 months old, had been fed earlier. His older brother was nearby, playing in another room. Nothing about the day suggested danger. When she returned around 8:30 that night, she walked into a scene that felt wrong from the moment she saw her baby. Holden was lying face down on a pillow, still and silent. Mothers know instinctively when something is off. She rushed to him, calling his name, her hands shaking as she tried to lift him. She called for help. She called family. She pressed her ear to his chest, hoping to hear a breath, a sound, anything. The ambulance arrived fast and Holden was flown to Penn State Hershey Medical Center. Doctors worked through the night. Machines kept his chest moving. Nurses stood quietly as the family cried and prayed. They tried everything, but by morning it was clear his small body could no longer fight. The decision was made to remove life support. A child who had spent only 5 months in this world was now gone. And the people closest to him were left with questions no one knew how to answer. At first, Holden's father, Wesley Brunson, told police it was an accident, that the baby had slipped or suffocated on the pillow. But the medical team saw signs that didn't match the story. Holden had injuries no pillow could cause, internal bruising, trauma that required force applied for minutes, not seconds. The kind of force no parent should ever place on a child. Investigators returned to the home. They noted the quiet tension in the air, the older sibling watching from another room, confused and frightened. They asked Wesley what happened again. This time, his answers shifted. He demonstrated movements that raised more questions. Eventually, the truth started to emerge. Holden had been crying earlier that night. Wesley admitted he felt overwhelmed. He pressed down on his son's chest in frustration. He didn't say it with anger in his voice. He said it with something colder. Resignation. As if he knew there was no explanation that could make it right. The autopsy confirmed what investigators suspected. Holden's injuries required several minutes of pressure, not a quick mistake, not a slip during CPR. Doctors testified that the force had to be sustained. The truth was painful but clear. As the case moved into the courtroom, the community watched closely. The trial lasted 6 days, filled with testimony that brought tears to nearly everyone present. Holden's mother sat through each moment, wiping her face, trying to stay strong. Prosecutors held up timers to show the length of pressure needed to cause the injuries. 1 minute, then 2, then 3. Those moments felt endless, even in silence. When the verdict came in September 2023, guilty of third-degree murder, the room was quiet. Holden's mother cried softly, her voice almost gone from the long, painful days leading to that moment. During sentencing, she told the court that every morning still felt like the day she lost him, that nothing in her life looked the same anymore. That grief had become her shadow. The judge spoke directly about the videos she had seen. Holden smiling, cooing, reaching for his mother. She said the little boy looked full of life. Then she looked toward Wesley and told him that his actions had taken away a child who deserved a future. The judge sentenced him to 20 to 40 years in state prison, the most allowed for third-degree murder. Some may have hoped for more. Others simply wanted the truth honored. But in the middle of all the legal language, the pain of a mother echoed as the most powerful part of the hearing. Today, People who live near Williams Grove Road still remember the ambulance lights cutting through the darkness that night. They remember the sudden silence that fell over the neighborhood after the news spread. They remember seeing Holden's picture on local stations, a smiling little baby whose life ended before it really began. Holden's family continues to speak about him. They describe him as sweet, peaceful, and full of light in the small videos they still watch. They pray for him. They hold on to his memory. They try to protect other families by speaking openly about the danger of frustration and unchecked anger with infants. Their pain became a message, a quiet warning, delivered with love rather than blame. And even though Holden's time was short, his story continues to touch people far beyond that small home on Williams Grove Road. Case 4, Tyler Sullivan, Warminster Township, Bucks County, 2023. On a quiet February afternoon in Warminster, the day began like any other. A young mother left for work, giving her baby one last kiss before heading out the door. She trusted that her 4-month-old son Cameron was safe at home with his father. She had no reason to believe the hours ahead would hold anything but the usual routine. A feeding, a nap, maybe a little fussing. Then the joy of coming home to her child's bright eyes and small smile. But by early afternoon, that sense of normalcy slipped away. At 1:45 p.m., a 911 call came in from the house. The father, Tyler Sullivan, told dispatchers he was feeding Cameron when the baby suddenly went limp in his arms. His voice on the call wasn't panicked. It was flat, almost confused, as if he wasn't sure how to explain what just happened. Paramedics rushed to the home and found Cameron unresponsive. They moved quickly, lifting him into the ambulance while asking questions that didn't have clear answers yet. Cameron was taken to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Doctors examined him right away. What they found brought the entire room to a stop. Cameron had injuries that no accident could explain. Bleeding deep behind both eyes, swelling inside his skull, and damage to his spinal cord. These were the unmistakable signs of violent shaking, the kind of trauma that leaves no external marks, but devastates the body of a small child. The medical team knew instantly what they were looking at, and they alerted investigators. For days, Cameron lay on life support while doctors fought for him. His mother spent every moment she could at his bedside. She held his hand. She whispered to him. She begged him to stay. But on February 17th, just a week after the injuries, the machines could no longer keep his body going. Cameron was declared brain dead, and the family made the heartbreaking choice to let him go. A little boy who had just begun to explore the world, who had just learned to smile, to reach for toys, to recognize his mother's face, was gone. Investigators interviewed Tyler soon after the medical team contacted them. His explanations changed more than once. First, he said Cameron had choked. Then he said he fell. Later, he said something else entirely. But nothing he described matched the injuries. Not one part of his story lined up with the science. Finally, confronted with the evidence, he admitted that he shook Cameron hard. He said he was overwhelmed. He said the baby would not stop crying. But even those words felt small compared to the damage done. At the police station, detectives noted how Cameron's mother sat quietly in a chair, tears falling as she listened to what doctors had found. She had believed her son was safe, She had trusted the man she built a life with. Now everything she once knew felt distant. When the case reached the courtroom in 2024, the grief inside that room was impossible to ignore. Cameron's mother stood at the podium during sentencing, her voice breaking as she spoke to Tyler. She didn't yell. She didn't curse him. She simply spoke from a place of heartbreak only a parent who has lost a child could understand. "You were supposed to protect him," she said through tears. "You were his father." The judge looked over the evidence, the medical testimony, the confession, and the pain radiating through the courtroom. She spoke plainly and without anger. She said Cameron was a bright, happy baby who should have had his whole life ahead of him. And then she delivered the sentence: 15 to 30 years in prison, followed by probation. Some felt the sentence was fair. Others wished it were stronger. But no sentence could ever give Cameron back to the people who loved him. In Warminster, news of the case spread fast. Many residents had seen Cameron's picture, a smiling little boy with soft cheeks and bright eyes, a child full of promise. The loss cut deep, even for people who had never met him. Vigils were held. Candles flickered along sidewalks. Parents held their children closer that week. Cameron's mother and family created a page in his honor, a message to other caregivers urging them to reach out when stress grows too heavy, to ask for help, to protect the smallest and most vulnerable among us. They wanted Cameron's brief life to mean something. They wanted to prevent another family from carrying the same ache. And now in that community, when people speak of Cameron, they speak of his smile, his innocence, and the light he brought in his short time on earth. They remember a baby who deserved safety, love, and a chance to grow. His story continues to remind families that moments of frustration can become life-changing in an instant, and that no child should ever bear the cost of an adult's anger. Case 5. Brian Kennedy, Radnor Township, Delaware County, 2019. On a spring evening in Radnor Township, the Wawa on Sugartown Road was as busy as ever. Cars pulled in and out. Teen employees stocked shelves and joked with each other between customers. It was the kind of place where people felt safe meeting up or grabbing a coffee before heading home. For Stephanie Miller, it was familiar ground, a public space where she had done countless custody exchanges with her ex-husband to protect herself and her son. She chose this place because she trusted the lights, the people, the steady flow of customers. She believed nothing dangerous could happen here. But on March 28, 2019, the everyday comfort of that convenience store turned into the scene of a tragedy that shook the entire Philadelphia suburbs. Stephanie arrived at Wawa around 8 in the evening for her scheduled custody exchange. She expected Brian Kennedy, the father of her young son, to pull up with the child in the back seat, like he always did. Instead, Brian arrived alone. He didn't bring their son, and that single detail, unnoticed by most in the parking lot, was the first sign that this night was different. Brian had already made his choice long before he pulled into that lot. For weeks, he had been planning buying the AR-15 rifle, gathering ammunition, researching how to use it, and searching online for steps on loading and operating the weapon. He even tried to change the exchange location earlier that day, hoping to isolate her. But Stephanie refused. She trusted the space she knew. As she stepped out of her car, she had no way of knowing he had the rifle hidden and ready. Moments later, Customers inside the store froze as the sound of gunfire cut through the air. A teenager behind the register said he first thought it was a prank because the weapon looked unreal, but the screams told him otherwise. People ran. Others ducked behind shelves. Some grabbed their phones and dialed 911 with shaking hands. Outside, Brian fired several shots at close range. The bullet struck Stephanie, who had no time to run, no time to scream, no time to ask why. She fell near the door, and by the time police reached her, she was already gone. The officers on the scene later said it was one of the most shocking acts of violence they had ever witnessed in a public place. Stephanie was a mother simply trying to keep a routine exchange safe. She was there for her child. She trusted the world around her. Brian fled the scene, driving toward Thornbury Park. Hours later, police found him slumped in his BMW, unresponsive from an overdose attempt. The AR-15 was in the trunk. He survived that night and was taken into custody. As detectives pieced together the evidence, a chilling truth surfaced. This wasn't sudden anger. This wasn't a moment of emotional collapse. This was planned down to the smallest detail: the purchase, the ammunition, the online searches, the attempt to lure Stephanie somewhere more isolated. Even the timing suggested intent. Everything pointed to a man who had decided long ago what he wanted to do. The community around Radnor, Wayne, and the main line was shaken deeply, not just by the violence, but by the idea that a mother who tried to do everything right, who filed reports in the past, who used a public space, who followed all the guidelines for safety, still lost her life. Stephanie's family spoke openly about her love for her son. They remembered her as a woman who worked hard, who was kind, who put her child above everything. Her son was only 6 at the time. With one act, Brian robbed him of his mother forever. When the case reached trial in January 2023, the jurors saw all the pieces: the gun purchase, the ammunition bought the day before, the online activity minutes before the shooting, the texts he sent trying to isolate her. They watched store surveillance video capturing the final moments. They heard about past incidents, threats, fear, the reason Stephanie always insisted on public exchanges. In the courtroom, Brian tried to blame drugs, stress, and emotional turmoil. But the facts were clear. Every step he took in the days leading up to March 28th pointed to intent. Jury deliberations took less than half an hour. Brian Kennedy was convicted of first-degree murder and later received a life sentence. He will never leave prison. At sentencing, Stephanie's family spoke with voices full of pain and strength. They talked about her light, her dedication as a mother, and the future she never got to see. The judge spoke plainly, calling the act a betrayal and a loss that would echo for life. Outside the courthouse, people carried candles at vigils. Co-workers, neighbors, friends, and even strangers came together to remember Stephanie. They spoke her name with gentleness. They held her son in their prayers. They acknowledged the heartbreak of a mother taken during something meant to keep her safe. Today, the Wawa on Sugartown Road still stands. People still walk through its doors for coffee, snacks, and quick stops. But for those who remember that evening in 2019, something changed there. A moment of violence carved a permanent mark on a place where a mother once stood, hoping only to see her child safely. Stephanie's story remains a reminder that domestic violence does not always stay hidden behind closed doors, and that sometimes it reaches into the places we trust most. Case 6. Andre Gordon, Jasper Falls Township, Bucks County, 2024. On a cold March morning in Levittown, the streets were just beginning to wake. Porch lights glowed softly. Families were getting breakfast ready. Children were still in their pajamas. It felt like any other weekend morning, calm, predictable, familiar. But at 8:40 a.m., that sense of normal life was shattered when a terrified caller told police that a man had taken their car at gunpoint in nearby Trenton. What no one knew yet was that this was only the beginning. The man who stole that vehicle, 26-year-old Andre Gordon Jr., was heading toward a place filled with people who once loved him, a place where he had grown up, argued, laughed, and shared family meals, a place where memories and wounds lived side by side. His first stop was the home on Viewpoint Lane, where his father, stepmother Karen, and his 13-year-old half-sister Kira lived. They knew Andre struggled. They knew mental illness had gripped him tightly over the years. They had tried to help at times. Other times they had stepped back, unable to reach him. But no one expected him to show up that morning armed with a rifle and a storm of confusion and anger. A little before 9 o'clock, he arrived at the home and forced his way in. His father tried to intervene, but Andre struck him with the rifle, leaving him injured on the floor. Karen, sensing danger, called 911. Her voice shook as she whispered that her stepson was attacking them. She begged for help. She said she had children in the house. Seconds later, gunfire echoed through the hallway. When officers arrived, Karen and Kira were gone. The father survived his injuries, but his world had changed forever. Andre didn't stay long. He got back into the stolen car and drove a short distance to another home in Falls Township, a home where his ex-partner Taylor Daniel lived with their young daughters and her mother. Taylor had loved Andre once. She had tried to hold on to hope for him during his most difficult moments. But their relationship had fallen apart under the strain of instability, disagreements, and mental health struggles. When Andre entered the home, Taylor's mother was the first to confront him. She tried to protect her daughter, and he struck her with the rifle. Then he found Taylor. 2 small children were inside the house as well, watching, confused, crying, calling out for their mother. They witnessed something no child should ever see. By the time Andre left that home, Taylor was gone. 911 calls poured in from both addresses. Officers realized quickly that these weren't 2 separate incidents. This was one man moving through the community with purpose and chaos intertwined. For a moment, the entire Falls Township area felt frozen. Schools began lockdown procedures. Businesses closed early. Residents were told to stay inside. Even the annual St. Patrick's Day parade, an event families looked forward to, was canceled as helicopters circled overhead. Within minutes, another carjacking was reported. Andre had taken another vehicle, crossed state lines, and made his way back into Trenton. Officers from multiple agencies, local police, county detectives, state authorities, worked together to track him. They found the car outside a home where Andre had once stayed. A long, tense standoff followed. Andre barricaded himself inside with several people in the home. Officers negotiated, urging him to step out, assuring him they didn't want violence. Hours passed. The community waited in fear, families prayed. Parents held their children close, whispering reassurances they weren't sure they believed. Finally, late in the afternoon, Andre walked out and surrendered. inside the homes he had entered earlier that morning, the scenes told a story that words struggled to carry. A stepmother who loved her family. A 13-year-old girl with her entire future ahead of her. A young mother who adored her daughters. 3 women taken from the world within minutes. 2 small children left, holding memories that would follow them for the rest of their lives. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Andre's mind had been unraveling for a long time. He was homeless at the time of the killings. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. In the months after his arrest, doctors determined he was not mentally well enough to stand trial, and he spent nearly a year at Norristown State Hospital receiving treatment until he was stable enough to face the charges. When the case finally moved to court, Andre chose to plead guilty. There would be no trial, no long arguments, no drawn-out testimony. He accepted the charges, 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with dozens of related offenses for the attacks and carjackings. By pleading guilty, he removed the possibility of a death penalty trial. On May 28, 2025, the courtroom was full. Family members of the victims sat together, holding tissues, leaning on each other for strength. Prosecutors played the 911 calls, showing the fear and courage of the victims in their final moments. They showed doorbell footage. They spoke of the lives that were lost and the countless lives forever changed. Andre sat quietly. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, he answered softly, "Yes, Your Honor." He offered no statement, no explanation, only quiet acceptance. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms, ensuring he would spend the rest of his days in prison. Additional charges added more than 150 years to the sentence, making any form of release impossible. For the families, the sentencing brought an end to the legal process, but not to their grief. Taylor's daughters still ask about their mother. Kira's friends still remember her laughter at school. Karen's relatives still speak of her warmth and generosity. The community still remembers the morning when fear swept through neighborhoods that had always felt safe. But alongside the sorrow, people in Falls Township also remember the love these women gave during their lives. They remember the strength of a stepmother, the joy of a young teen, and the devotion of a mother whose children were her entire world. And in the middle of all the heartbreak, their families continue to honor them through memorials, prayers, and quiet moments that keep their memories close. This case remains one of the most painful in recent Pennsylvania history, not only because of the tragedy, but because of the innocence lost and the homes forever changed. And yet within that pain, the community also found unity, neighbors supporting each other, families leaning on faith, and people refusing to forget the lives taken too soon. Case 7. Matthew Scott Harrison, Penn Township, Lancaster County, 2024. On a cold afternoon in February 2024, an 11-year-old girl stepped off her school bus and walked toward her home on East Mount Hope Road. It was the same walk she made every day, backpack bouncing lightly, thinking about homework, friends, and the small things that fill a child's world. She opened the door expecting to see her mother, Jamie, getting dinner started or folding laundry. Maybe the TV would be on. Maybe there would be music playing. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. She walked down the hallway past the living room toward the bedroom where her mother sometimes napped after work. And there, on the bed, She saw her mother lying completely still. Jamie wasn't breathing. Her neck showed marks. Her skin had changed. Something was terribly wrong. The girl grabbed the phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. Her voice broke as she tried to explain that her mother wasn't waking up and that her stepfather was really mean and hurts her. Dispatchers knew immediately they needed officers at the house fast. When police arrived, they found 49-year-old Jamie A. Harrington, a mother of 3, a cheer mom, a long-time employee at a printing plant, and the warm center of her family. She had been strangled earlier that day. There were signs of sexual assault, and there was no sign of forced entry. Her husband, Matthew Scott Harrison, was gone. What investigators learned in the hours that followed painted a picture of days filled with fear. Only a week earlier, their marriage had nearly fallen apart during a loud argument. Matthew stormed out, checked himself into a hotel, and for the next 3 days sent Jamie more than 120 messages filled with threats. He accused her of things she never did. He wrote disturbing things to family members, telling one he had murder on his brain, and to a co-worker that he wouldn't be back. He even wrote to Jamie, "It's till death do us part." On February 5th, he checked out of his hotel around 1:40 p.m., drove back to the home, walked inside, and attacked her. She tried to fight, but she never had a chance. After he killed her, he left her on the bed and fled the house before the children returned. The moment that broke the hearts of the entire community was the knowledge that Jamie's daughter walked into that room alone and found her mother lifeless. Lancaster County detectives and officers from surrounding areas launched a massive search. For 3 days, they followed tips, checked hotels, and called family members. Finally, on February 8th, officers traced Matthew to a hotel in Pittston. After a short standoff, he surrendered. The interviews that followed were disturbing. Matthew claimed Jamie wanted him to kill her, a statement no one believed. Investigators had already seen his messages, the threats, and the signs of long-term abuse described by the children. One daughter told police he had pushed Jamie into walls and even strangled her in the past. Another remembered him pouring beer over her head to humiliate her. This wasn't a sudden act. It was the final step in a long pattern of control. When the case reached court in July 2025, Matthew pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and strangulation, avoiding a death penalty trial. During sentencing, Jamie's daughters spoke through tears and anger. One called him a coward. Another said Jamie was their only true parent, and he stole her from them. Even the judge said Matthew had a responsibility to protect his wife, and instead chose one of the lowest acts a man could commit. Jamie's family asked that people remember her by her maiden name, Harrington, because that was the name she carried with pride, the name tied to the years when she was a hopeful young mother, full of light and strength before her marriage turned into fear. She worked at the same plant for more than 20 years. She raised her girls with patience. She spent weekends cheering at games, smiling from the bleachers, supporting her daughters no matter how busy life became. She was the type of mother who stayed up late helping with homework, the kind of friend who lifted others when they were down. Her church community remembered her as warm, faithful, and always ready to help. Her daughters remembered her as their comfort. Her friends remembered her laugh. On February 16, 2024, the community packed the Mannheim Brethren in Christchurch to celebrate her life. They shared stories, hugged her daughters, and promised to keep her memory alive. Today, people still talk about Jamie as someone who deserved safety, love, and peace. She gave so much to others, her children, her family, her community, and the people who knew her want her to be remembered for the kindness she lived by, not the violence that ended her life. Matthew is now serving life in prison with an additional 5-10 years added on. But no sentence can repair what he took from those girls. What remains is the memory of a mother who kept going even when life was hard, a woman who loved deeply, worked tirelessly, and raised daughters who now carry her strength inside them. And for many in Penn Township, her story will always be a reminder that hidden pain inside a home should never be ignored, and that every person deserves love that protects, not harms. Case 8. Caleb Fairley, Collegeville, Montgomery County, 1995. On a Sunday afternoon in September 1995, the Collegeville shopping center was filled with the ordinary sounds of life. Parents carrying toddlers, teens gathering outside the pizza shop, people running errands before the week began. It was the kind of place where families stopped in without a second thought. Safe, familiar, predictable. Among those families were Lisa Mandarak and her little girl, Devon. Lisa had dark hair that fell softly across her shoulders, a warm smile, and a gentle way of speaking. Devon, barely a year and a half old, clung to her mother's shirt while pointing excitedly at toys and colorful displays. They walked into a children's clothing shop called Your Kids and Mine, planning to pick up something small before heading home. It was a simple errand, a normal moment, something countless mothers do every day. By nightfall, neither of them made it home. When Lisa's husband, Jimmy, realized they were missing, confusion quickly turned into fear. Her car was still parked outside the store. Her purse was gone. There was no note, no call, no sign of trouble. Police arrived and began searching the plaza, speaking with workers, checking stores, asking if anyone had seen a young mother and her daughter that afternoon. Inside Your Kids and Mine, officers noticed something troubling right away. The store was oddly quiet. The clerk on duty, 21-year-old Caleb Fairley, claimed he didn't remember seeing them. But the investigators saw scratches on his face, covered with makeup. They spotted a pornography magazine on the floor, stained in a way that made them uneasy. And the dressing rooms held tiny peepholes drilled into the walls, holes that should never have been there, especially in a store for children and parents. Something inside that shop felt wrong. The next day, hikers at Valley Forge National Historical Park found the small body of a toddler on a trail. It was Devon. The discovery broke the hearts of everyone involved in the search. Officers had hoped she would be found safe. Now they were searching not for a child, but for answers. The investigation moved quickly. Evidence inside the store tied directly to Lisa and Devon. Long, dark hairs on the carpet, baby DNA on the floor, signs of a struggle. Caleb's story began to break apart. He claimed the scratches came from a concert, but the timing didn't match. His alibi didn't match. And the evidence was too strong to ignore. Under pressure, Caleb eventually led detectives to a remote industrial area near King of Prussia, where they found Lisa's body. The truth of what happened inside the store was painful and disturbing, and it left officers shaken. Lisa had fought for her life and for her daughters. Devon had been killed so she would not identify him. A young mother and her child, doing something as innocent as shopping for clothes, had crossed paths with a man hiding darkness behind a quiet exterior. The community around Collegeville was devastated. Parents who once wandered that shopping center without thinking now held their children close. People spoke in whispering voices at vigils, placing flowers and candles where Lisa's car had been found. Strangers cried openly for a mother and child they had never met. When the case went to trial in 1996, the courtroom was heavy with grief. Lisa's husband sat with family members listening to every detail. He had loved his wife deeply. He adored Devon. Losing them both in one moment was a pain he carried quietly through the proceedings. The jury heard the full truth, the attack, the panic inside the store, the way Caleb covered his face afterward, and the way he tried to continue his evening as if nothing had happened. They learned about his growing obsession with dark fantasies, his loneliness, the warning signs that no one noticed soon enough. The verdict was guilty. Caleb received 2 life sentences. He showed little emotion when the judge spoke the words that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. Yet the people who knew Lisa and Devon never defined them by their final moments. They remembered Lisa's kindness, her love for her family, her devotion to helping others. They remembered Devon's bright eyes and playful laugh. They made sure that their story would not end in the store where they were last seen. A memorial playground was later built in Devon's honor, a place full of light, color, and laughter. Instead of letting the community be consumed by fear, families gathered there to celebrate the little girl who once brought joy to everyone around her. The swings, slides, and pathways became symbols of healing, reminders that even in the darkest stories, love can create something lasting. Parents still visit that playground today. Some bring flowers. Others sit quietly, watching their children play. And every so often someone tells a friend or a child about Lisa and Devon, about the day they disappeared, the search that followed, and how their memory continues to live in a place built for joy rather than sorrow. Their story remains one of the most heartbreaking cases in Montgomery County history. But it also stands as a reminder that a community can hold on to love even when tragedy tries to take it away. Case 9, Jarrod Tutko Sister Harrisburg, Dauphin County, 2014. Some stories don't begin with a sudden call for help or a loud moment in the night. Some begin with silence, the kind that sits heavy inside a home where something has been wrong for far too long. In the summer of 2014, a quiet row home on Penn Street in Harrisburg held 7 children. Neighbors knew the family mostly by sight. The kids would sometimes be seen on the porch or looking out from the windows. Nothing about the house suggested the heartbreaking truth that was hidden behind one closed bedroom door. Inside that room lived 8-year-old Jarrod Jr., a boy who had just turned 9 only days before. He had severe disabilities from birth. He couldn't speak, walk, or feed himself. He needed constant care, comfort, and a parent who would check on him often. But he didn't have that. For days, maybe longer, he had been left alone in a room with no working lights, no clean bedding, and no one checking to see if he was awake, sleeping, or in pain. His father, Jarrod Sr., later admitted he had not gone upstairs in days or weeks. His mother had her own explanations, each story changing every time police asked. The house had 6 other children living in it, but none were sent upstairs to check on their brother. Everything came to light on August 1st, 2014, when one of the younger children whispered something to a family friend. "My brother is upstairs and he's not moving." The friend immediately called police. When officers arrived, they gently made their way through the home. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. At the top was a heavy smell that no one could mistake. The door was shut. Inside, they found a scene that broke even the most seasoned investigators. The room was filled with trash. Clothes were piled in corners, the walls were stained, and under a heap of clothing they found Jarrod Jr. He had been gone for days. A child who could not speak, who could not call for help, had passed away alone in a room only a few feet above where the rest of his family lived their daily lives. Officers stepped back, shaken. Later, one of them said it was the hardest scene he had ever walked into in more than 20 years. The autopsy confirmed what nobody wanted to hear. Jarrod Jr. had died from dehydration and malnutrition. His body weighed less than it should have for a child half his age. He was completely dependent on the adults who had promised to care for him, and they failed him at every turn. The investigation began immediately. Police listened to both parents give shifting explanations. They said they thought each other was checking on him. They said he sometimes slept for long hours. They said they didn't realize he had passed. But the evidence told a different story. In interviews, the father admitted he didn't want to deal with it, even after he realized his son was already gone. He left the room untouched. He didn't call for help. He didn't tell anyone. Life inside the house continued as if nothing had happened. Detectives couldn't understand how a parent could walk past that bedroom door again and again, knowing the child inside needed them. The district attorney's office filed charges quickly. 3rd-degree murder, endangering the welfare of children, and abuse of corpse. The mother faced separate charges as well. When the father appeared in court, the judge spoke in a firm, steady voice. He said it was the most upsetting case he had ever seen, not because of a moment of violence, but because of long-term neglect that stole a child's chance at life. In October 2015, Jarrod Sr. pleaded guilty. A month later, he was sentenced to 30 to 60 years in state prison, a sentence long enough that he will likely never live outside of a cell again. The remaining 6 children were removed from the home and placed into safer environments. Their futures were suddenly separate from the place where they had witnessed so much confusion and fear. The Harrisburg community mourned a child they never truly got to know. People brought candles, small toys, and handwritten notes. Some asked how such a thing could happen in a house filled with so many people. Others asked how a child with such fragile needs could slip through every crack in every system meant to protect him. Quiet conversations began across the city about the importance of checking on children with severe disabilities, supporting stressed families, and taking early warnings seriously. To this day, people still remember Jarrod Jr. as a little boy whose life could have been full of love, comfort, and care, if only the adults around him had chosen differently. His story is painful, but it reminds us of something true. Every child deserves attention, safety, and compassion. And when a community learns of a case like this, the hope is always the same, that no child will ever be left unseen again. Case 10. Mark Short Sinking Spring, Berks County, 2016. On a warm August morning in 2016, a friend pulled into a small neighborhood in Sinking Spring. She was dropping by for a planned playdate. The Short family had always been welcoming. Megan was known for kindness, her patience with the kids, and her bright smile that made visitors feel at home. But when the friend walked up the driveway, something felt strange. The door was unlocked. The house was unusually still. She stepped inside, calling Megan's name, expecting to hear the children running through the hallway or the dog's paws tapping on the floor. There was nothing. Moments later, her voice broke as she called 911. Inside the home, police found a scene of deep sorrow. Megan Short, age 33, and all three of her children, 8-year-old Liana, 5-year-old Mark Jr., and 2-year-old Willow, had been shot while they slept. The family's therapy dog was found nearby, and in the same room, officers found 40-year-old Mark Short, who had turned the gun on himself after killing his wife and children. The discovery shook the entire area. It was hard to understand how a family that looked so peaceful on the outside could come to such an end. Only a month earlier, Megan had taken steps to protect herself and the children. She had filed a protection order. She had told friends she felt relieved to finally have space. She loved her children dearly and wanted to build a future free from fear. Mark had moved out, but he still had a key, and that single detail turned into the doorway through which everything was lost. In the days that followed, investigators pieced together the quiet downfall of the marriage. Mark had become controlling, installing hidden cameras and tracking Megan without her knowledge. Their home became a place where trust faded, replaced by constant tension. Megan's friends said she had finally begun to feel hopeful again during the separation. She even posted online the night before saying she felt safe and grateful. No one imagined that hours later the family would be gone. Police ruled the deaths a murder-suicide within 2 days. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle, no unknown visitor. Mark had used a handgun he purchased the year before. He waited until the house was dark and quiet. Megan and the children never had a chance to cry out or call for help. When the district attorney spoke at a press conference, his voice was steady, but the pain behind it was clear. He said this was every advocate's worst nightmare. A woman who did everything right, took all the recommended steps, and still lost her life and the lives of her children. In the days that followed, the community came together in grief. Schools offered counselors. Parents held their children a little closer. Prayer circles formed. Candlelight vigils filled the streets. People brought flowers, handwritten notes, and stuffed animals to the front yard of the Short home. Megan had been known for her kindness. She volunteered. She coached soccer. She wrote openly about her family's struggles and victories on her personal blog. Friends called her the bright center of the household, the one who kept things together even when times were hard. Her daughters, Liana and Willow, were sweet, playful girls who loved crafts and acted like little shadows to their mother. Her son, Mark Jr., was full of energy, with a laugh that filled the room. The family dog, their little therapy companion, had been part of their healing during earlier challenges. The loss felt impossible to explain, even for those closest to them. As the funeral passed and news coverage slowed, the larger question lingered. How could a family that worked so hard to move forward end in such tragedy? Megan's family later filed a civil claim against Mark's estate. It didn't change what happened, but it helped them secure support for funeral costs and allowed the children's memories to be honored through local memorial efforts. Over time, the community created small tributes, a park bench, flowers that reappear every August, quiet moments of reflection at school events where the children once played. People still talk about Megan's final post. Feeling grateful tonight. My kids are happy and safe. It wasn't a prediction. It wasn't a sign that she failed to see danger. It was the voice of a mother trying to move toward hope, unaware of the darkness that would return through a door she believed was closed. Today, when people in Berks County speak about the Short family, they speak with reverence. They remember Megan's kindness, the joy of her children, and the way their lives touched others. They also speak more openly about domestic isolation, the danger of hidden control, and the strength it takes for someone to seek safety. The story stays with people because it reminds them that even in homes that look quiet and peaceful from the outside, someone may be fighting a battle they feel they cannot speak about. And for many, the Short family's memory continues to be a call to reach out, check in, offer support, and listen. Because sometimes the smallest act of care can make a difference for someone carrying more than they can hold alone. These 10 stories are heavy. They show how families can lose everything in a single night, in a single room, or in a moment no one saw coming. As we carry these stories with us, we hold on to what matters most: the lives that were taken, the love they gave, and the tenderness they brought into this world. Their names deserve more than cold headlines. They deserve to be remembered for their laughter, their strength, and the way they touched the people around them. And if these cases teach us anything, it's that the signs of danger inside a home are often quiet, sometimes silent. It takes courage from loved ones, friends, neighbors, and entire communities to speak up when something feels wrong. And in the middle of sorrow like this, many people reach for something steady. Some turn to prayer. Some look for peace in small moments. Some simply sit with their thoughts, hoping to understand how life can shift so suddenly. Maybe you've had nights where you whispered a prayer of your own. Maybe you've carried a hurt that no one else could see. These stories don't give us all the answers, but they remind us why kindness matters, why we check on each other, and why hope is still worth holding. Tonight, we honor the families changed forever. We remember the children who never got to grow up. We carry the memory of mothers who loved deeply, and we keep faith in healing and compassion and in the belief that light still rises after the darkest moments. May their memories guide us, may their stories push us to act with love, and may peace reach every home still waiting for healing.